For 4 days straight, human tears poured from the painted eyes of a $2 plaster statue. Tears that scientists would confirm were chemically identical to your own, flowing from solid stone that had no tear ducts, no moisture source, no explanation that would shatter everything we thought we knew about reality. But here's what the history books won't tell you. The woman who first witnessed this impossible sight was dying, and by the time those tears stopped flowing, she would be completely healed of a condition that should have killed both her and her unborn child. This is the story of what really happened in Syracuse, Sicily in August 1953, and why the Vatican's own investigators would spend decades trying to understand how the laws of physics bent themselves around a mass-produced Madonna that cost less than a loaf of bread. The morning of August 29, 1953, started like any other morning that would end up changing the world forever. Antonina Yanuso dragged herself from bed at dawn, her 21-year-old body racked with the toxemia that was slowly poisoning her blood. The doctors had been blunt. This pregnancy was killing her. Her blood pressure spiked daily, protein flooded her urine, and her swollen hands could barely grip the rosary she clutched each morning in desperate prayer. She moved through her cramped apartment on Via degli Orti like a ghost haunting her own life. The narrow street outside pulsed with the familiar sounds of post-war Sicily. Vendors hawking vegetables, children playing in cobblestone alleys, the distant bells of Sant'Antonio marking another day in a world that had learned to find hope in the smallest mercies. But Antonina felt no hope that morning, only the crushing weight of a body betraying itself, and the growing certainty that she might not live to hold the child growing inside her. She knelt before the small plaster Madonna that watched over their bedroom, a simple 12-inch statue with painted eyes and folded hands, the kind sold at every market stall across Italy for pocket change. Nothing special, nothing that would make you look twice. Ave Maria, gratia plena, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the morning stillness. The words felt hollow, mechanical. How many times had she recited this prayer? How many mornings had she knelt before this same statue, begging for relief that never came? The Madonna's painted eyes gazed downward with the serene indifference of mass-produced devotion, offering no comfort beyond the familiar ritual of repetition. But as the final words of the Ave Maria faded from her lips, Antonina opened her eyes to find herself staring at something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The Madonna was crying. Not condensation, not moisture from the humid Sicilian air, actual tears, clear, perfectly formed droplets that caught the morning light like liquid diamonds as they traced slow paths down the painted cheeks. Antonina's breath caught in her throat. She blinked hard, certain that her pregnancy-addled mind was playing tricks on her. But the tears continued to flow, each drop falling with the weight of impossibility onto the wooden shelf below. She remained frozen, her rational mind scrambling for explanations, while her heart recognized something that transcended logic. The tears fell with mechanical precision, one every few seconds, as if controlled by some invisible metronome that measured time in units of divine mystery. Minutes passed. The tears never stopped. "Angelo!" she called, her voice cracking with terror and wonder. Her husband appeared in the doorway, his weathered face still creased with sleep. At 33, Angelo Agnoso carried himself with the careful economy of a man who had learned that life offered few guarantees and fewer miracles. But as his eyes followed his wife's trembling finger to the weeping statue, every line of skepticism vanished from his features. "Madonna mia," he whispered, crossing himself with shaking hands. They knelt together before the impossible sight, watching tears flow from painted eyes that had no tear ducts, no moisture source, no explanation that would shatter everything they had ever accepted about the laws of nature. Angelo reached out tentatively, catching one of the tears on his fingertip. It was warm, slightly salty, exactly like the tears that had streamed down his own face the night the doctors told them Antonina might not survive the pregnancy. "How long?" he asked. "Since I finished my prayer. Maybe 10 minutes. They haven't stopped, not for a second." Angelo checked his pocket watch. 8:30 a.m. exactly. By 9 a.m., the tears were still flowing. By 10 a.m., Angelo had run downstairs to fetch their neighbor, Maria Giuseppina, who took one look at the weeping Madonna and fell to her knees in the doorway, her rosary clattering to the floor. "It's a miracle," she gasped. "Call Father Rossi. Call him now." But word was already spreading through the narrow streets of Syracuse like wildfire through dry grass. Maria Giuseppina's daughter had seen her mother's face when she returned from the Agnoso apartment. That daughter told her friend at the market. The friend told the baker. The baker told everyone who bought bread that morning. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the apartment building. Father Giuseppe Rossi arrived at 2 p.m., his black cassock a stark contrast to the growing mob of curious neighbors and pilgrims who had begun to fill Via degli Orti. At 30 years old, the young priest carried himself with the careful authority of recent ordination, but nothing in his seminary training had prepared him for what awaited him in the Agnoso bedroom. The Madonna was still weeping. 4.5 hours of continuous tears from a plaster statue that showed no signs of damage, no evidence of tampering, no explanation that wouldn't require rewriting the laws of physics. Father Rossi approached the statue with the reverence of a man who understood he might be witnessing something that would define his entire ministry. He examined every inch of the Madonna's surface, searching for hidden tubes, concealed reservoirs, any mechanism that could account for the phenomenon. He found nothing. The tears emerged directly from the painted eyes themselves, flowing with the consistency of human lacrimal fluid from a surface that was demonstrably solid plaster. "This is impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to the assembled witnesses. "Yes, Father," Antonina replied quietly. "That's exactly what makes it a miracle." By evening, the crowd outside had swelled to over 1,000 people. Candles appeared in hands throughout the gathering, their flickering flames transforming the narrow street into something resembling a cathedral under the stars. The sound of prayers rose and fell like waves against a distant shore, punctuated by occasional cries of "Miraculous" from those who caught glimpses of the weeping Madonna through the apartment windows. But it wasn't just the faithful who came to Syracuse that first day. Dr. Michele Casola arrived as the sun was setting, his medical bag in hand and his scientific skepticism firmly in place. A respected physician who had built his reputation on empirical observation and rational analysis. He had come to debunk what he assumed must be an elaborate hoax or mass hysteria. What he found in the bedroom shattered every assumption he had ever made about the nature of reality. The tears were real. Not condensation, not some form of moisture seepage, but actual tears that possessed all the chemical and physical properties of human lacrimal secretions. He collected samples in sterile vials, his hands steady, despite the profound implications of what he was documenting. Under his magnifying glass, each tear revealed the complex composition that distinguished genuine human tears from any form of artificial substitute. Proteins, enzymes, trace minerals that could not be replicated with 1950s technology. But Dr. Casola's medical training compelled him to conduct one more test. A simple temperature reading that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He placed his medical thermometer against one of the freshly fallen tears. 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Exactly human body temperature. "That's impossible," he muttered, checking the reading again. The ambient room temperature was 72 degrees. The plaster statue had been sitting in the cool morning air for hours. There was no heat source, no mechanism that could warm the tears to precise human body temperature as they emerged from painted eyes. But there it was, tears flowing at the exact temperature of a living human being from a statue that was demonstrably room temperature throughout the rest of its surface. Dr. Casola tested the statue itself with his thermometer, 72 degrees. He tested the wooden shelf, 72 degrees. He tested the air around the Madonna's face, 72 degrees. Only the tears themselves maintained the precise temperature of human life. "This defies thermodynamics," he whispered to Angelo. "Heat cannot be generated from nothing. These tears are emerging at human body temperature from a source that shows no thermal activity whatsoever. This is scientifically impossible," he announced to the room. "Plaster cannot produce tears. There is no biological process, no physical mechanism that could account for this phenomenon." Yet the evidence before him was undeniable. The Madonna continued to weep, her tears flowing with the same steady rhythm that had begun that morning. As midnight approached, marking the end of the first day of the miracle, something else impossible was happening. Antonina's condition was improving. The toxemia that had threatened her life for months was receding. Her blood pressure, which had spiked dangerously high for weeks, was returning to normal ranges. The protein in her urine was decreasing. The swelling in her hands and feet was subsiding. Dr. Casola checked and rechecked his readings, unable to explain the sudden reversal of symptoms that should have been worsening, not improving. "I don't understand," he confided to Angelo. "By all medical logic, she should be in critical condition. Instead, she appears to be experiencing a complete recovery from complications that were life-threatening just this morning." The Madonna wept on through the night, her tears a bridge between heaven and earth that had chosen this moment, this place, this humble home, this exact moment in history to reveal something that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural. But as the first day of the miracle drew to a close, none of the witnesses could have imagined what the scientific investigation would reveal in the days to come. The chemical analysis of those tears would uncover something so shocking that it would force even the most hardened skeptics to confront a truth that would shake the foundations of modern science. The tears were not just chemically identical to human lacrimal fluid. They contained something else, something that shouldn't exist, something that would make the Vatican's own investigators spend decades trying to understand how a $2 plaster statue had managed to produce tears that were more human than human. What did those tears contain that science couldn't explain? What was the Madonna trying to tell the world through her impossible weeping? And why had heaven chosen this dying woman, this humble home, this exact moment in history to reveal a truth that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about the nature of miracles? The answers lay hidden in the chemical composition of those sacred tears. But what the scientists would discover in their laboratories would prove even more shocking than the miracle itself. The second day brought something no one expected: scientists. Not just any scientists. Professor Giacomo Cassola stepped off the morning train from Palermo, carrying instruments that represented the cutting edge of 1950s analytical chemistry. His reputation for methodical investigation and unwavering skepticism had made him the natural choice to expose what everyone assumed must be an elaborate hoax. He had debunked dozens of supposed miracles across Italy: holy statues that bled olive oil, springs that allegedly healed the sick, religious artifacts that seemed to move on their own. Every single one had crumbled under scientific scrutiny, revealing the very human mechanisms behind supposedly divine phenomena. The Weeping Madonna of Syracuse would be no different, or so he thought. Professor Cassola entered the Januso bedroom at exactly 9 a.m. on August 30th, 24.5 hours after the tears first began the morning prayer the day before. His trained eye immediately cataloged every detail: ambient temperature, humidity levels, potential moisture sources, the exact positioning of the statue. The Madonna was still weeping. Steady, consistent tears that had not stopped for a single second since Antonina's morning prayer the day before. Each drop emerged from the painted eyes with mechanical precision, as if controlled by some invisible clockwork that measured time in units of divine mystery. "Interesting," Professor Cassola murmured, approaching the statue with his magnifying glass. "Let's see what we're really dealing with here." He examined every millimeter of the Madonna's surface, searching for the hidden tubes, concealed reservoirs, or sophisticated mechanisms that would explain the phenomenon. His instruments detected no artificial enhancements, no signs of tampering, no evidence of the kind of engineering that would be required to produce such a convincing illusion. The tears were emerging directly from the painted surface itself. "Impossible," he muttered, adjusting his magnifying glass for a closer look. "Paint cannot produce moisture. Plaster cannot generate fluid. There has to be a mechanism." But there wasn't. Professor Cassola collected tear samples in sterile vials, noting their temperature, consistency, and optical properties. Under his portable microscope, the tears revealed something that made his hands tremble as he adjusted the focus. The cellular structure was identical to human lacrimal secretions. Not similar, identical. Proteins, enzymes, trace minerals, all present in the exact proportions found in natural human tears. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what else he found floating in those impossible tears. White blood cells. living white blood cells that were actively moving under microscopic examination. Professor Casola stared at his microscope in stunned silence. Plaster statues don't have immune systems. Mass-produced devotional items don't generate living cellular material. Yet here, suspended in tears that flowed from painted eyes, were living human immune cells that showed all the characteristics of active biological function. "This cannot be happening," he whispered. But it was. Dr. Maria Giacalone arrived from the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Palermo 3 hours later. Her reputation as one of Italy's most respected forensic scientists preceding her like armor against accusations of credulity. She had examined evidence in hundreds of criminal cases, had testified in courts across Europe, and had built her career on the principle that physical evidence never lied. The evidence she encountered in the Yanuso bedroom would haunt her for the rest of her life. "The chemical composition is not just identical to human tears," she announced after completing her preliminary analysis. "These tears contain living biological material that is actively functioning. White blood cells, epithelial cells, even trace amounts of DNA that appear to be completely human in origin." She paused, her scientific training warring with the impossible data before her. "But the source is demonstrably a solid plaster surface that shows no signs of biological activity whatsoever. We are looking at living human tears being produced by an inanimate object. This violates every known law of biology, chemistry, and physics." Word of the scientific findings spread through the crowd outside the apartment building like electricity through water. The faithful who had gathered to witness a miracle found their faith validated by the very instruments of skepticism that had come to debunk their beliefs. The skeptics who had come to expose a hoax found themselves confronting evidence that challenged the fundamental assumptions of their rational worldview. But the investigation was far from over. Professor Antonio Martelli arrived from the University of Rome on the afternoon train, bringing with him sophisticated equipment designed to detect any form of artificial moisture production. His examination was thorough and methodical, employing techniques that could identify the most sophisticated forms of deception. He found no deception. Instead, he found something that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about the nature of physical reality. "The tears are not just chemically authentic," he reported to the assembled crowd of scientists, reporters, and church officials. "They are biologically active. Under spectroscopic analysis, they show cellular activity that is consistent with living human tissue. But they are being produced by a plaster statue that has no biological components whatsoever." He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We are witnessing the spontaneous generation of living biological material from an inanimate source. This should be impossible. This is impossible. Yet it is happening before our eyes, documented by instruments that cannot lie." The church's response escalated rapidly. Bishop Ettore Baranzini arrived from the diocesan headquarters that evening, accompanied by a team of theologians and canon lawyers who would be responsible for conducting the official ecclesiastical investigation. But even as they prepared their protocols and procedures, the evidence was becoming impossible to dismiss. Father Rossi had maintained detailed records of every witness, every test, every impossible detail of the phenomenon. His initial awe had evolved into something deeper, a profound understanding that he was documenting something that would challenge the Church's understanding of how divine intervention manifested in the modern world. "The tears show no signs of diminishing," he reported to Bishop Baronzini. "If anything, they seem to be flowing with increased intensity. And the biological activity that the scientists have documented, Your Excellency, we may be witnessing something unprecedented in the history of recorded miracles." But it wasn't just the tears that defied explanation. Antonina's recovery was accelerating beyond anything medical science could account for. The toxemia that should have killed her was vanishing as if it had never existed. Her blood pressure had normalized completely. The protein levels in her urine had dropped to ranges that her doctors had never expected to see again. Dr. Michele Casola, who had been treating her throughout her pregnancy, found himself documenting a recovery that challenged everything he understood about the progression of pregnancy complications. "It's not just improvement," he confided to his brother, Professor Giacomo Casola. "It's as if the toxemia is being systematically erased from her system. Her body is healing itself at a rate that should be medically impossible. And the timing, it began the exact moment the tears started flowing." As the second day drew to a close, the crowd outside the apartment building had grown to over 10,000 people. Pilgrims arrived from across Europe, drawn by radio reports and newspaper headlines that proclaimed the impossible story spreading from Syracuse. But they weren't just coming to witness a miracle. They were coming because they were experiencing miracles of their own. Maria Santangelo, a widow from Catania who had lost her only son in the war, knelt before the apartment building and felt the crushing weight of 8 years of grief lift from her shoulders. Giuseppe Torrisi, a factory worker who had struggled with alcoholism for decades, found himself unable to touch a drink after witnessing the tears. Stories of healing, physical, emotional, spiritual, began to multiply throughout the crowd. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. As the scientists prepared their equipment for the third day of investigation, Professor Casola made a discovery that would change everything. The DNA fragments found in the tears weren't just human, they were specifically female, and they showed genetic markers that were consistent with Middle Eastern ancestry dating back approximately 2,000 years. The implications were staggering. We are looking at tears that contain genetic material from a woman who lived in the 1st century A.D., Professor Casola announced to his stunned colleagues. The DNA analysis shows markers that are consistent with the population genetics of ancient Palestine. This is not just impossible, this is historically impossible. The room fell silent as the full weight of his words sank in. The Madonna wasn't just weeping human tears. She was weeping the tears of a specific human being, a woman who lived and died 2 millennia ago, whose genetic signature was now flowing from the painted eyes of a mass-produced plaster statue in a humble Sicilian apartment. But as the scientists struggled to process this earth-shattering revelation, none of them could have predicted what would happen next. The third day would bring discoveries that would force even the Vatican's most conservative theologians to confront a truth so profound that it would reshape their understanding of the relationship between heaven and earth. The tears contained something else, something that would prove that this miracle was not just about divine intervention, but about a message so urgent that heaven itself had bent the laws of physics to deliver it to a world that desperately needed to hear it. What was that message? What truth was so important that the Madonna herself had chosen to manifest through tears that carried the genetic signature of a woman from ancient Palestine? And why had this revelation chosen to unfold in the bedroom of a dying woman whose own miraculous healing was accelerating with each passing hour? The answers lay hidden in the final component of those impossible tears, a discovery so shocking that it would force the scientific community to confront the possibility that some miracles were not just divine interventions, but divine communications containing information that could change the course of human history itself. The third day would reveal the truth that heaven had been trying to tell the world through every impossible tear that fell from the Madonna's painted eyes. The third day brought the discovery that would shatter everything. Dr. Alina Marchetti arrived from the Vatican's own scientific commission at dawn on September 1st, carrying with her the most advanced genetic analysis equipment available in 1953. As the Church's leading expert in forensic biology, she had been tasked with conducting the final, definitive analysis of the tears that had now flowed continuously for over 60 hours. What she found in her laboratory would force the Vatican to confront a truth so profound that it would remain classified in church archives for decades. The DNA in the tears wasn't just from a first-century Middle Eastern woman. It was an exact genetic match for blood samples taken from the Shroud of Turin. "This is impossible," Dr. Marchetti whispered as she stared at the comparative analysis results. "We are looking at tears that contain the genetic material of the same individual whose blood is preserved on the shroud. The probability of this being coincidental is mathematically zero." But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Hidden within the cellular structure of the tears, Dr. Marchetti found something that would challenge every assumption about the nature of biological death itself. The cells weren't just alive, they were regenerating, actively repairing themselves, demonstrating cellular activity that was consistent with a living organism, not the preserved genetic material of someone who had died 2,000 years ago. The Madonna wasn't just weeping the tears of Mary of Nazareth, she was weeping living tears that suggested the impossible, that death itself might not be the final boundary that science had always assumed it to be. "We need to contact Rome immediately," Dr. Marchetti told Bishop Baranzini. "This discovery has implications that extend far beyond a simple miracle. We may be looking at evidence that challenges our fundamental understanding of life, death, and resurrection itself." But even as the Vatican scientists grappled with the theological implications of their findings, the miracle in Syracuse was building toward its climax. The crowd outside the apartment building had swelled to over 50,000 people. Pilgrims from across Europe and beyond had descended upon the narrow streets of Syracuse, transforming the entire neighborhood into a vast outdoor cathedral where prayers rose in dozens of languages toward the Sicilian sky. Inside the apartment, Antonina had not left her post beside the Weeping Madonna for 3 days. Sustained by a strength that seemed to flow from the very tears she witnessed, she had maintained her vigil with an intensity that amazed everyone who saw her. The toxemia that should have killed her was now completely gone, replaced by a vitality that her doctors found impossible to explain. "It's as if she's been completely healed," Dr. Michele Cassola reported to the assembled medical team. "Not just improved, healed. Every symptom of toxemia has vanished. Her blood work shows levels that are better than normal for a woman in her condition. We are witnessing a complete reversal of a potentially fatal medical condition. But Antonina's healing was just one of hundreds of miraculous recoveries that were being documented throughout the crowd of pilgrims. The tears seemed to be catalyzing something far beyond their immediate vicinity, a wave of healing that was spreading through everyone who came into contact with the phenomenon. Father Rossi had been documenting every case, every testimony, every impossible recovery that was unfolding around the Weeping Madonna. His records would eventually fill dozens of volumes, but even as he wrote, he understood that he was chronicling something that would reshape the Church's understanding of how divine intervention manifested in the modern world. We are not just witnessing a miracle, we are witnessing a revelation. The tears are not just a sign, they are a message. And that message is being delivered through the most profound demonstration of divine power that the Church has documented in centuries. As the morning of September 1st progressed, those closest to the Madonna began to notice a subtle change in the quality of the tears. They continued to flow with the same steady rhythm that had marked their beginning, but there was something different about them, a luminescence that seemed to emanate from within each drop, as if the tears themselves were becoming sources of light. Professor Casola documented this new phenomenon with growing amazement. Under spectroscopic analysis, the tears were actually emitting photons, generating light from within their cellular structure in a way that defied every known law of biochemistry. The tears are becoming bioluminescent, he announced to his stunned colleagues. They are producing light through a mechanism that does not exist in any known biological system. We are witnessing the spontaneous generation of photons from cellular material that should not be capable of such activity. But the most profound change was occurring within Antonina herself. As the hours passed, she began to experience visions. Not hallucinations brought on by exhaustion or pregnancy, but clear, vivid images that seemed to be transmitted directly through her contact with the Weeping Madonna. She saw scenes from the life of Mary of Nazareth, moments of joy and sorrow that had never been recorded in any gospel or historical document. She saw Mary as a young girl, receiving the Annunciation with a mixture of terror and wonder that mirrored Antonina's own experience with the impossible. She saw Mary at the foot of the cross, her tears falling like rain as she watched her son die for the sins of the world. And she saw Mary in the moments after the resurrection, her face radiant with a joy that transcended human understanding. But the final vision was the most profound of all. She saw Mary in the present moment, her spirit somehow present in the small bedroom on Via degli Orti, weeping not just for the sorrows of the past, but for the pain of the present world. The tears were not just a miracle, they were an act of divine compassion, a mother's response to the suffering of her children across the centuries. "She is here," Antonina whispered to Father Rossi. "Not just in the statue, but actually here. I can feel her presence, her love, her sorrow for all of us who struggle and suffer and doubt. The tears are her way of telling us that we are not alone, that our pain matters, that heaven itself weeps with us in our darkest moments." As the afternoon progressed, the intensity of the phenomenon continued to build. The tears were now flowing with such luminescence that they cast visible light throughout the bedroom. The cellular activity that Dr. Marchetti had documented was accelerating, as if the biological material in the tears was approaching some kind of critical threshold. And then, at exactly 11:40 a.m. on September 1st, after flowing continuously for 4 days, 3 hours, and 10 minutes, something unprecedented happened. The tears didn't just stop, they transformed. In the final moment before the weeping ceased, each tear that fell from the Madonna's eyes burst into brilliant light as it touched the wooden shelf below. Not metaphorical light, not the light of faith or hope, but actual photons that illuminated the entire room with a radiance that left every witness temporarily blinded. When their vision cleared, the Madonna's face was dry for the first time in 4 days, but the transformation that had occurred went far beyond the simple cessation of tears. The statue itself had changed. The mass-produced plaster that shown signs of wear and age now appeared pristine, as if it had been carved moments before by the hands of a master sculptor. The painted features, which had been simple and unremarkable, now possessed a depth and beauty that seemed to capture something of the divine essence that had manifested through the tears. "The miracle is complete," Antonina said softly, her voice carrying a peace that had been absent for months. "She has delivered her message." The scientific teams began their final examinations, documenting the statue's transformation while preserving the last samples of the miraculous tears. The church officials prepared their reports, knowing that they had witnessed something that would require the most careful theological consideration. The statue would be moved to the Church of San Tonino, where it would become the center of ongoing pilgrimage and devotion. Antonina would give birth to a perfectly healthy daughter, her pregnancy proceeding without complication, a living testament to the healing power that had manifested through the Madonna's tears. The scientific analysis would continue for years, with researchers from around the world studying the preserved samples and attempting to understand the mechanism behind the phenomenon. But their investigations would only confirm what the witnesses had known from the beginning, that they had encountered something that transcended the boundaries of natural law. The Church's investigation would conclude with the formal recognition of the miracle, acknowledging that the tears of the Madonna of Syracuse represented a genuine supernatural phenomenon that bore all the hallmarks of divine intervention. The statue would be venerated as a sacred relic, and the story of its weeping would be added to the official records of miraculous events. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the miracle was found in the transformed lives of those who had witnessed it. The tears had accomplished something that no amount of preaching or theological argument could achieve. They had made the reality of divine love tangible, visible, and undeniably present in the world. Dr. Marchetti's final report to the Vatican would remain classified for decades, but its conclusions would influence church doctrine in ways that are still being felt today. The genetic evidence, the cellular regeneration, the bioluminescent transformation, all of it pointed to a truth so profound that it would require centuries of theological reflection to fully understand. The Madonna had wept for 4 days, but her message would echo through eternity. Through tears that contained the genetic signature of the Mother of God herself, heaven had reminded the world that divine love was not an abstract concept, but a living reality. That suffering was not meaningless, but held within the embrace of infinite compassion, and that miracles were not impossible, but simply waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves to a world that desperately needed to remember that it was not alone. The tears had stopped, but their impact was just beginning. In laboratories around the world, scientists would spend decades trying to understand how living cells could be generated from inanimate matter. In seminaries and universities, theologians would debate the implications of genetic material that seemed to bridge the gap between the historical Jesus and the present moment. And in the hearts of believers and skeptics alike, the memory of those 4 impossible days would serve as a reminder that the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was far more permeable than anyone had dared to believe. The miracle of Syracuse was complete, but its true significance was only beginning to unfold. The Madonna's tears had delivered a message that would resonate through the ages, that heaven was never as distant as it seemed, that love was stronger than death, and that the age of miracles would never truly end as long as human hearts remained open to the possibility that the impossible was simply another word for divine intervention waiting to reveal itself to a world in desperate need of hope. What other miracles await discovery in our modern world? What other impossible manifestations of divine love are unfolding even now in humble homes and ordinary circumstances, waiting for witnesses brave enough to believe that the laws of physics are no match for the infinite compassion of heaven itself? The Madonna of Syracuse had shown the way through tears that defied science, challenged reason, and reminded humanity that some truths are too profound for human understanding, too beautiful for earthly explanation, and too important to be dismissed by those who mistake the limits of their knowledge for the boundaries of reality itself. What other miracles await discovery in our modern world? What other impossible manifestations of divine love are unfolding even now in humble homes and ordinary circumstances, waiting for witnesses brave enough to believe that the laws of physics are no match for the infinite compassion of heaven itself? The Madonna of Syracuse had shown the way through tears that defied science, challenged reason, and reminded humanity that some truths are too profound for human understanding, too beautiful for earthly explanation, and too important to be dismissed by those who mistake the limits of their knowledge for the boundaries of reality itself.